Hello.
Hello, AOS fans!
It's the agents of Embergard.
And in this video, we're going to give Warhammer Underworlds its school report.
So Underworlds has been out a little while now, maybe 4 months, something like that.
So, something like that, beginning of November, something like that, I can't remember.
Yeah, and we figured we'd take a look back at where we started on this journey and where we're at now and how we think GW and Underworlds is doing.
Yeah, 4 months is roughly a school term, so we thought we'd give it a little end of term school report. You could make a video of incredible length and nobody would agree with all the different pros and cons.
And that's what we're going to
do. you choose. But I think Underworlds has delivered on its two primary objectives, which I think number one is that we get to play with the beautiful, beautiful models that GW keep producing. And number two is that you have a game that has meaningful decisions at every point.
Yep.
Across the 24 turns.
12 turns each and every one of them matters.
Absolutely. And I think that is what I really like about it. I very rarely feel like what I do is irrelevant in any game. And I think that's better than it used to be.
I'm sure some people would probably say we'd like to have more of those beautiful models. Yeah, they couldn't play for all the old ones, but they have added in some rather fantastic new warbands, and they've all been beautiful so far.
So we'll have a little deeper dive now and look at some of the big changes and say what we think of them, how they've affected the game, and whether we sort of rate it as a A+ or maybe a D-.
And one of the first things, as we're gesticulating at, is the board placement and the starting sequence to the game.
Yeah, I have to say I think this has been a massive improvement. I know there were people who had detractors, people didn't like the fact that there was only one board from now on, but I think it's just so much simpler. The sequence works and you haven't got to worry about different boards, you haven't got to take loads of different boards around with you. It's still meaningful. I must confess I never really gave a huge amount of thought to my board placement, probably less than I should do, so maybe that's why I like it, because actually it makes less difference now. But it is important to consider which way around you put it and where you line up your starting hexes. So I think there's meaningful decisions to be made there already.
And I do think it cuts back on the negative play experience that you would get sometimes if you got longboarded or really offset and you just knew from the get-go that as soon as your opponent placed those boards like that, you were just screwed. You just knew that you were in for a bad run of it regardless.
Yeah. And even from a practical point of view, you knew that you always know you can fit it on the table.
Yes, it only takes up so much area, and you need a little bit around the edge, but you've not got to worry about, we can't actually fit longboard across the table, so now we've got to put this janky angle.
Which from running
like
tournaments perspective is much easier.
Yes.
Much easier.
The starting sequence as well, I think, is much better than it was. And I wouldn't say it was very complex before, but it makes so much more sense now that you pick your cards and then stuff happens. So everything is dependent on you knowing the state of the cards you've got.
Yes, I like that. It's kind of quite a big change actually, but one that you don't really think about. But over the time, it's just, it's really nice. I know where I'm going from the beginning.
It also has them going in a much better order, that you draw your cards first, then you do a bunch of stuff on the board with models, and then you roll again to start the game. There's not do something, roll a dice, do something, roll a dice. There's no faffing back and forth. It's one thing, then the other thing, then crash on.
I do miss the 4 dice roll-offs, but actually it's not really a massive effort to roll a dice a couple of extra times.
Not really.
I thought I would really miss it, but like a lot of these things, when you actually get going, it's not really any different.
So overall, my rating for board placement and starting sequence would probably be around a B+.
Okay, I think I'll give it a solid A.
Ooh, there we go.
Yeah, I don't think. I guess we might discover that it can be improved upon, but I think, it wasn't particularly broken, but it's even better now. One of the biggest changes, of course, was that we moved to war scrolls.
So all your warbands abilities were now on that scroll, and the individual fighter cards were much simpler, much cleaner. There wasn't reams and reams of text all over the place.
I generally like that. I like the fact that there's a single inspire condition on a war scroll card. I like the fact that the cards aren't completely cluttered with text. The only problem I do have is that I often, depending on the warband, not so much Grandfather's Gardens, which I've got here, I do tend to forget to use the abilities because they're not in front of me. I tend to focus quite heavily on the cards that are in front of me and forget to look at that.
Yeah.
But I guess that's a me problem rather than a game problem.
Some warbands generally have worse war scrolls than others, and sometimes you just end up thinking about them less and forgetting about them a bit more. Other warbands like the Headsman's Curse. They've got some fantastic abilities on their War Scroll that are always in the forefront of your mind and tie into what you're doing on the board. So
yes, quite often some of them are intrinsic, aren't they, to how the whole thing plays. Like, I do tend to forget that I've put the thing on, so I might remember that I remember to give them the +1 attack dice, but then just forget to actually apply it.
Yeah.
I do that with Morgits quite a lot too. But again, I think that might be a me problem, and Games Workshop can't really mitigate for that.
No, not very easily at least anyway. And it's nice to have that situation now where in the old version of the game, with something like the Reapers, Canaan's Reapers, you'd be looking at the fighter's card and they have an ability to be like, go and see this other fighter's card for that ability. You'd be like, okay, I've got to find that other card now, and you've got to reread it. And some warbands later on, they just had reams of text on them that was quite daunting for newer players, but now much more streamlined.
And it's much easier in games for people to say, well, what does your warband do? If you have come across a warband that you haven't seen before, people can either read it to you or they can just go, there you go, have a look.
Yeah.
And it's just much easier. And I think because they are simpler as well, it's easier to have a general idea when you sit down across somebody with a warband. Oh yeah, I know roughly what they do. That's fine. We can crash on. One possible flaw, I'm not sure this is a new flaw to this game or any other game, but is that not all war scrolls are created equal. There is some imbalance there, and particularly out of the gates there was quite a lot of heavy imbalance. Yeah,
looking at things like the Discord and Gorchos of Drom, they were very overpowered to start with, and they did get nerfed later on. We're now looking at warbands maybe like Zarbag Gits stuff, who might be a little bit on the OP side and need a little bit of a tap with that nerf mallet.
And I guess you're always going to get that in a game. I suppose it's a shame that you have got these nice cards which then get changed and you've got to work out how to errata them. But I think, again, that's probably a problem the game was always going to have, certainly always did have, because they did errata cards. But they've got less options now for weakening stuff because of the way there's no faction deck and things like that, which is another thing we'll come on to in a minute.
So again, a rating for this one, I would probably give this a solid B again.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think it's pretty well executed, and it has simplified things quite a lot.
Yeah, and I think it's all about making the game faster and simpler, especially for newer players, so we can bring in that new blood and grow the whole hobby. Next up on the list is the changes to the crit mechanic.
What do you think of this, Pete?
Unsurprisingly, I'm a big fan of this change.
Because you know roll them.
Yes.
You haven't noticed the difference.
Crits. No, it looks fine to me. It performs exactly as it did before.
Yeah, I am in favour of this change. It's taken me a little bit of time to get my head round because being so used to how it works.
6 or 7 years of playing it one way and now being told, no, we're not doing that anymore.
Maybe it's just because I keep rolling crits, but I haven't noticed the feel bad moments in the same way as when you used to like roll 5 dice and your opponent rolled 1 dice and they got a crit and you didn't.
Yeah. Like, oh, I've rolled 5 hammers. Oh, you've got a crit again. Yeah. Of course you have.
Yeah, and it still can be when your opponent rolls a crit or 3 crits like I did the other night.
Yeah.
But it isn't as devastating as it used to be.
No, and if your opponent attacks you and rolls like a crit and a hammer or something like that, if you've got 2 dodge, you've still got a chance. You can still roll 2 dodges and you might still be okay out of that. Definitely found in general it's made the fighters a bit more survivable. The more defense dice you're rolling is always better as well.
So what rating would you give this change?
I think I'd give this an A.
An A, you give it an A? Yeah, I think A. I'll give it an A. I'll go along with that. So I think possibly the biggest bone of contention for people who were deeply in love with first edition was the removal of the faction decks.
Now we don't have those warband specific decks, we just have rivals decks that everybody has access to, and if you're playing in the Nemesis format, you just take any 2 of those and you combine to make a valid deck out of them.
Any 2 as long as both of them haven't got plot cards.
Yes.
Small D- for not actually putting plot card on the plot card. I think this is going to be quite a big one. It's going to be the bulk of this video.
Yeah, we've got a lot of pros and cons.
There's a lot of pros and cons, and then we'll come down to a score at the end. So one of the biggest pros for me is that when you've been playing a few games, and I know that they are going to add Nemesis decks or Rivals decks as we go along, but when you've played a few games and you've used a few Rivals decks, you kind of know what your opponent is going to have. When they say, I'm bringing Pillage and Plunder and Blazing Assault, you go, right, okay, well, I've got to watch out for Strip the Realm, and I know that they've got some plus dice things in there for their attack, so I need to be thinking about that. And so when you're playing the game, you're learning the game, you're learning both sides of it. You're learning how to use it, but you're also learning how to counter it because you know what you don't want to happen when you're playing it. So I really like that, because there were times when your opponent would turn up with a warband you hadn't seen for 6 months. You'd be partway through the game and then they'd pull out a really good card, like, I don't know, something that switched damage on one fighter to another fighter and killed one of yours and healed one of theirs. Yeah. And you'd be like, well, I wasn't looking for that.
No.
So I just feel that just takes away those feel bad moments.
Yeah, and I think that depending on how your view on this is, some people say, well, that just meant you had to be better at the game and you had to know more stuff. But to me, it just meant you just had to remember more things, and that doesn't strike me as a better way to make a game work. Whereas now you have less things to remember, but you also know that your opponent is proactively working against what you're doing, just like you're proactively working against theirs. So it makes it much more reactive in that way, rather than you just going, oh, so you've just played that combination of cards and I'm dead then, am I? Oh, that was fun.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I forgot you could do that, so I've lost. Whereas this case is like, well, actually, you outplayed me there because I knew you could do it, but I still couldn't stop you. And that is a much better experience. That's much more like, and it's probably come up again, it's much more like the chess experience.
And because of this, when you play Rivals games, they actually matter a lot more now, because you're going to be playing with a good chunk of the Rivals decks when you play Nemesis. So playing just with those Rivals decks helps to reinforce in your brain what cards are good where, what objectives that you can score in which fashion, and it just generally helps you remember the deck as a whole much better.
Absolutely, and which cards are good with your warband.
Yes.
So if you're playing a warband for the first time, we would recommend choosing a likely Rivals deck and playing that a couple of times just to see which cards you use, which cards are useless, because some, like Branching of Fate in some warbands is terrible, and other warbands is excellent, and just learning that, and which cards get stuck and things like that. It's a really good way to learn. So following on from that, when you do go on to the Nemesis deck building, every Nemesis deck you build gives you some information that's then useful for other warbands. I have taken experiences from using Pillage and Plunder and Blazing Assault with one warband, with Zikit's Claw Pack, and actually that will work really nicely with Borgit's Beast Grabbers, because they've got some similarities. So you everything you're playing with the game, you're learning and getting better. Whereas in the old days, again, you had two different faction decks. When you changed faction, it completely changed how they played. Completely, you had a whole new set of cards to learn, and everything you had learned, not everything, but half of what you had learned, let's say, was useless for a new warband.
And again, I'm sure people coming into the game from the old edition might say, well, it was better the old way because you had more permutations, but you just had more permutations that were also rubbish. Whereas now, a lot more of them are really good, and it also enables you to get better at deck building, because you're taking certain decks, you kind of already know what cards are really good, what cards are good in certain situations. If you've got more of a hoardy warband, which cards you need to start looking at more. And it was true in the old game, you knew which cards were better and worse, but you still learn something every time you build a deck.
Yeah, and it makes the game easier to teach as well, because you can say, oh, well, this has happened because you built the deck like this, or I've been able to do this because I built my deck like that. And actually, you could never do that in the old game. It's like, well, this is good because this warband has an extra great strength that you don't have. Sucks to be you. You haven't got that anymore. And perversely, with there being sort of maybe a more restricted choice, I think that it's made the meta more fluid, because I don't think the game ever really had a meta. Now, it did in one sense of the word, in the sense that certain things were really strong at certain times until some cards got a nerf, but it was never like, oh well, everybody's playing this combination now. Like my son plays a lot of Pokemon, so as things become strong, other people, they make counter things to that deck, so that the meta shifts, because suddenly that deck isn't so good anymore because people have sussed out how to break it. I feel like we can get into that situation with Underworlds now. So aggro was very, very strong, but people worked out for the Grand Clash at Warhammer World that maybe Pillage and Plunder might be better for that. So we were moving to a Pillage and Plunder world where people are doing crazy things like taking 15 objectives, which like many people wouldn't ever do. But now that's being seen as a valid kind of course of action. And then I hope that then people are thinking, okay, well, Pillage and Plunder. I know this for a fact that this has happened with my own deck from the discussions I've had with some of our patrons. And there's a card for holding all of the odd numbered objectives. And I would never have taken that to the Grand Clash, because I was expecting to be heavily aggro, and it's quite hard to get onto get onto more than one objective potentially. But because everybody's playing Pillage and Plunder, it suddenly becomes much easier, because they're flipping them all over. You want to be on one anyway to stop Strip the Realm, so you might as well make it an odd numbered one, and then you could score that and deny them 3 glory. So that's an example of the meta shifting just by people playing it more, which I think is really good.
And also things like, okay, Pillage and Plunder's big, people are going to want to jump onto objectives flipping, so I'm going to go with Sentinels, which means I'm just going to go and park on a bunch of objectives. Now you can't get to them, and that's going to screw you up, but it's also going to help me out because I need to stand on those objectives.
Absolutely. And there may be those people who were playing Pillage and Plunder who think, well, okay, well, they're standing on objectives now, everybody is, so I'm going to take aggro to cut them off the objectives. And so
So
Circle
it
goes
spins
round.
round and round. So those are a lot of the pros that we've come up with, but there are some cons to it as always, and we are trying to take a balanced look at things.
Yes, despite me saying that the meta shifts and that people are responding to different ways, it can feel a little bit samey. Certainly post the Grand Clash, I did feel like everybody took Countdown to Cataclysm, and that was a bit dull.
Also, not all decks are created equal, and this is a general problem with Games Workshop. They still can't balance some of their stuff. So you've got some decks like the Edge of the Knife, which you can't take with Countdown to Cataclysm because they both have plot cards. Unfortunately, when you then start looking at them, right now Countdown to Cataclysm is just a better deck than Edge of the Knife, so no one's going to take Edge of the Knife if they have a choice.
And there are always edge cases, so when Pete says no one, it doesn't really mean no one, but same with Rack and Ruin. It's kind of like 95% of the warbands are not very good with Rack and Ruin, and okay, you could argue you have to be a more skillful player to use those, and that's great if you want that challenge, but generally you want efficiency and you don't want to have to melt your brain every time you want to play. So the easier warband decks are just easier to play, which means everybody plays them, which means they're the ones you see all the time. Now we are in a situation where we only have 7. Do we have now?
Yeah, 7.
So there's not loads,
no.
And people are very used to the 4 that were in the box originally. But I would like to see more Rivals decks and a bit of variation, but also trying to get them a bit closer in balance.
Yeah, and to spin this back round to a pro a little bit, it is nice to see that most of the really powerful decks right now are the 4 from the box, which means if you're new to the game and you come in and you buy the Embergard box, you've probably got 4 of the better decks to start playing with, which is nice.
Yeah, that is true. I mean, as a small counter con, it means there's no point in buying the new stuff. But that's a con for GW rather than us.
And another con, obviously, is that not all warbands are created equally, and so it means that some warbands are just going to do better with certain deck combinations than other warbands.
Yeah, which does mean if you particularly like a warband, you really want to play it, but it's just rubbish, you have a choice. You either stick it out and think, no, you're probably going to lose, or you have to play something else.
Yeah.
Which is a shame. I think it's always been that way.
Yeah.
There's always been terrible warbands, there's always been good warbands, and suddenly sometimes less good warbands have become good warbands as new cards have come out. And I guess that's still going to happen, but it doesn't feel great when your chosen warband, maybe the one you painted best or whatever, is just rubbish.
Yeah. So now we've got to give a grade for this one and what we think GW deserve for the changes they've made. What would you give them, Robin?
It's difficult. It's difficult. I think on balance I like it.
Yep.
I like it. There's not so many, because although the faction decks sort of added flavour, they also sort of didn't, because if there were better cards that weren't in faction decks, people just took those instead. And some faction decks have really bad naff cards. There were some really good ones, but I think on balance, the fact that they're gone just makes the game more accessible. Every game is a learning experience, which is building to your experience of the game. So I'm going to give it a B+.
Yeah, I think I would give it a very similar score, B to B+ myself, because all the reasons you've mentioned, the game is now much more accessible to newer players. There's less feel bad moments when your opponent just springs something on you that you just weren't even aware of, and as you say, every game matters now. And rules changes and actual gameplay aside, another aspect of what GW done with Embergard is the game support.
Yes, and I think we might give this a rating first and then say where we've given it.
Yeah.
So I think I'd give it a D,
Yeah.
possibly an E.
Yeah, D to E, definitely could try harder.
Yeah, I never really know, because GW are a bit of a sort of opaque box. I never really quite know how many people work on their game support team.
Yeah.
But I really feel like we've given it, probably on average, a B for everything that
Yes.
it's done so far. It's excellent version based upon a game we already love. It's an excellent version of it. Yeah, there's no OP kit yet. I mean, by the time, I don't know the way these things work, by the time it has any chance of coming around, it's going to be 6 months after the main release came out. So if you want people to come and play your game, for whatever reason, gamers love sparkly loot.
Everyone loves sparkly loot.
Sparkly loot. They want the alt art cards. People
Yeah.
went nuts for them at Warhammer World, and there's just nothing, and there's no even mention of it. Like I appreciate that again, GW don't want to talk about their processes, but like just to tell everybody there is one coming, but it's been more difficult than we thought.
Whatever the reasons, yeah. Because it does have an alt art board. Is it the alt art board that's caused problems? Are they like, oh, we're having trouble sourcing the material or whatever it is for that thing? Whatever it is, they're not telling us.
No, which I don't expect them to really. But at the same time, this game, it came out 6 months ago, and people were interested, and I just worry because there's no price support. So people don't want to run tournaments. We would have run a tournament earlier had there been any prize support. In the end, we just went off and have organised one, but we had to provide our own prize support, which is not an ideal position. If you want to run a tournament, you don't want to have to go and source other things. You just want to be able to buy the kit from GW, and that's the stuff that people want, really.
Yeah.
Although obviously we know you love our mugs.
Another aspect that contributes to that D- is GW support of the rules, the clarifications, the erratas, the FAQs, and generally their responsiveness to the rules themselves. Because whilst we do love this version of the game, it does have some rather glaring issues in it. Some of them were evident from day one. Some of them were just so obvious. They were just missing icons on cards, the wrong symbols and stuff like that. And GW kept silent on a lot of that stuff for several months.
Yeah, there does seem to have been quite a lot of quality control issues. And again, I get that happens, and I know that it's probably a relatively small team working on it. So I don't want to keep
bashing them.
You're rubbish. But
now give us more.
Tell us. Say, okay, yeah, we appreciate that the release wasn't perfect. We will do updates every 3 months. And then we know where we stand. So we know going into January, okay, well, we just had one, so we're not going to get another one till April. And then we know where we were. I mean, I'd have to say we don't particularly need one at the moment. There are a few things that are outstanding, but it's not too bad because the last one was quite good and it covered a lot of the issues. But then we would know where we were. But we never know.
No, they told us it was going to be quarterly, but they didn't really say when that quarter starts or whether they mean it will literally be 3 months from the last one will be the next one. Or
I have no faith.
No.
I have no faith in GW that it will be quarterly. I mean, GW as well could stretch it so that quarter 1 was the 1st of January and quarter 2 is
end of June.
Well, yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that annoyed a lot of people is there were, from everybody who watched the Worlds event and saw all the stuff going on there were obvious things that needed to be addressed directly after that for release day, and GW didn't. The only thing they did do is they went, that new warband we brought out, actually one of their abilities should have this word in it that we missed, and that was like the only thing they did. And it kind of felt like it would have been better if they'd not done anything than done that one thing, whilst ignoring the massive swathe of other stuff that people were all saying, what's going on with this, what's going on.
Yeah, but my main gripe, I have to say, because I think GW and other companies, they always make mistakes and they always have FAQ
I don't mind mistakes.
My main gripe is that there has been almost no tournament support for GW. Obviously, they ran a really good tournament in Warhammer World. I know they can't really run Warhammer tournaments and Underworlds tournaments in their shops, but I really feel like they ought to be really pushing the tournament side of it to get players in.
Yeah.
Or incentives for club nights or something to make people want to play Underworlds and make people want to run Underworlds events. So we run events and we have a club night down here in the southeast. Do put in the comments if you want to come along. We're quite rare in the sense that it is what we do, playing Underworlds. And if you just in passing, you're not gonna do that with no incentive.
And there's a lot of other, like we've mentioned Pokemon already, but Pokemon, they do a lot of stuff to big up their next releases.
Absolutely.
They do give out a lot of stuff for tournaments and other things to really build the excitement, to make people want to go to the stores, to the club nights and stuff like that.
If they did alt arts for club nights or even for pre-release type events, people would love it and they turn up in droves. I'm sure
they would. Yeah, and GW seems to approach from a kind of view of, well, we've released something, so there you go, it'll probably sell out really quick and then you have to wait months to get it, like the pack of cards with all the warbands and stuff in that was available for about a day and then it's been completely unavailable for the best part of 3 or 4 months. It's just a little bit disappointing to see them treat it with a similar level of disdain as they did before. We were hoping for more responsiveness now.
Yeah, and again, I suppose I get it. It's a very small part of their product. It's a small part of the AOS universe, which is a small part of the Games Workshop universe.
I think the AOS universe is much bigger these days for GW, and that does have a very large portion of their income, but Underworlds is a very small slice of that pie, and it probably has a very small team, whereas a lot of people out there will say, they're a $1 billion company or whatever, how come they can't do better? It's like, but they haven't got $1 billion tied up in Underworlds.
No,
it's like one guy in a basement and they're like, have you written another warband yet?
And Nick.
Like, no, I haven't written it yet. Can I have some food? No, not until you've written that FAQ. I'm very tired. So they've got to factor everything into how much time they give something, because they've got a lot of other much more worthwhile investments out there for them. For us, we only care about Underworlds and we want to see more
Yeah,
more
because
stuff.
we love Underworlds, so I suppose our gripe on the D- is that it's not supporting the thing that we love.
Yeah.
Which is a bit of a shame.
And to be honest, if you look at how they used to handle it before in the previous version, it's not really any different to that.
It isn't really. It isn't really. Though OP kits did come along with mostly with regularity.
Yeah, I think the OP kit is the most heinous omission from everything so far.
Yeah. So there you go. What do you think? What's your favourite change? What would you give it as its score report? Warhammer Underworld and Embergard.
For me, I think overall the game is just slicker, easier, and it's just more user-friendly, less negative play experiences, and it's just a nicer experience for newer players to come in and pick up. So I'm really hyped for this new version. I hope it continues to improve.
Yes, absolutely. I think it will. I think all of the warbands that have been released so far are great. I'm tend to be looking forward. I'm not really looking back at the old stuff. I'm going to be trying to play the new stuff as it comes out, because that's where it's more interesting to me, because that's what I'm like. That's what I'm like. But it's funny. I say I'll give it a B. That doesn't sound too good, but I'm really impressed with how this new edition is going. I'll give it a solid B. It's got a bit of room for improvement. Don't want to give it that A just yet. Don't want to give it that A just yet. But
you've got to work for an A.
Yeah, exactly. But I
B.
think it's taken a really good game and made it better.
So let us know in the comments below what you think. Do you disagree with any of our ratings? Do you think we should be giving it better report grades or worse?
So if you did enjoy this video, please click that like button.
And frankly, even if you didn't, click that subscribe button as well.
So you can find out more terrible opinions about Warhammer Underworlds.
So we'll see you soon, probably in the Embergard.
Bye.